Okay, so here's how I approach fixing it. First, I started doing a little searching with MDN number attribute input because I was like, it's got to be somewhere in here in the inputs. Okay, so when I did that and I went to MDN and I started reading through, okay, input number, right? Which, by the way, min and max, we could actually take out some of our code and use that. That would be awesome. And as I read down through here, I was like, okay, a list, min, max, those are cool. Placeholder, yeah, I could do that, right? Those all look like step. Specifies the granularity of the values must adhere to, right? So by default, and then because we don't have anything in there. So what we can do is we can just say any step. So people can be as precise in their inputs as they want. So here's how we'd fix the first one, okay? So coming back here to the index, right? I could, in the inputs, just put step equals any, okay? And I'll just copy that down so you don't have to watch me type so much. Let's just see what that does to our program, okay? So making sure, refreshing, making sure I have the latest copy. Can I hit 3.4? Can I hit 0.2? And can I do, more importantly, that, right? Great, I can do that, which is totally awesome, right? So let's just let it run. Cool, all right? So this allows me to enter them, but now I have the next problem, which is that it's not actually keeping those decimals when I'm storing them. So what I'd want to do here then is look at the way, and this is good. Let's actually do this like 30.2, 2.4. And let's go more realistically, probably not even. Let's set a breakpoint inside the event listener, right? And go ahead and hit submit. So when I wrote this, I used parse int. Let's just look at what parse int is doing. Parsing an integer, right? So that means it is, right? The function parses a string argument and returns an integer. What do we know about integer? They're whole numbers. So we're losing, by me doing that, just the decimals. So right next to it, there's this thing called parse int. And parse int will return a floating point number, which is what we would want here. And you can see examples of that. So in this case, we can start with just changing on the main. So instead of parse int, we can just do parse float. Okay. So that's a pretty easy fix. And really key is, again, knowing this stuff and knowing just there's different ways, because when you, and this is the other thing, is even when you reference e.target.milesValue, even though in the index file we've specified number type here, it still brings it in as a string. This just allows the input to say, listen, limit the inputs, but it doesn't actually, when pass through, do it. And let me show you that this is true, okay? So look at right now, right before we parse int it, okay? So we could do e.target.miles.value, okay? See, it's a string. Even though the HTML says it should be a number. Remember, it's not actually forcing it a number. It's actually giving us that nice interface to make a user enter a number, okay? So let's go ahead and finish this up. Hopefully that clears that up a little bit. Okay, so now let's see what this does to our code. Right, let's go ahead and take off the breakpoint on main here. All right, so now, okay, now these are information I entered before. Okay, so let's see, maybe there's somewhere else we need to, right? Parse int, let's just see what that does. Okay, so parse int miles, cool. So now we see that they're there. We can keep stepping through. There we go. Cool. Now we're going to go through the validation. Let's just let it run, see what happens, and awesome, right? So this fixed the two that we wanted. Okay, but notice that now our average still is showing not the decimals, and it would make sense given that we have some on the MPG, we don't have it on the cost, that we would see that. So let's fix it there as well. Now on this one, I took a little more time to kind of think about this, because there's traditionally when, and let's just go look at the code where we have this, which is in the average, right? So which is in the handle of the input, right? When you're tracking them, when you're calculating them. So here I did a round, okay? And again, round's going to, not again, but look up round. What's it going to do, right? Value is rounded to the nearest integer. So we lose our decimals by doing this, and we want them, right? We want them to be included. Okay, so let's see. Oh yeah, actually, let's go. Actually, I missed a step, which is okay. So let's go back to main, because I got it here, right? Let's actually watch this code, because there was another place. Once I have the correct values, let's actually do this under main, set a breakpoint right here at track. Okay, so let's do it here. It's not completely solved yet. When I hit submit, what I can see is that I do have miles, right? I do have gallons as decimal, and I do have price as decimal. So then when I step into here, and this is actually the code that fixes this, and I kept trip cost the way it was on round just to kind of show you. But one of the things, I want to be able to store the MPG and all the other related data that is in decimal. And a very common way to do this is to use what's called a toFixed. toFixed is a method that will actually convert it into a fixed decimal format, which is fine, but what it does is it stores it as a string. Now, and there are some actual issues with storing, and or actually when you use toFix, it's not as accurate for, now this is for higher end mathematics, not for what we're doing here, but in general. So I actually went out and asked ChatGPT, and it gave me an answer I had not thought about, which was we can call number. Okay, now here's where we've defined the number. We call a toFixed first. So we do a toFix, which converts it into a string, but then we call number on what that string is, and it converts it into our number that we want. Okay, our decimal numbers. And what I like about this solution, and it's what I implemented here, okay, and I'll just go up and show you. I had intended to take it out and walk you through it, but we'll walk through the other one as well. Okay, here on where we calculate it, right? So this is the way we had it before. So the first thing you can do is just after right here, okay, so you take price times gallons, type toFixed. Okay. Now, in this case, we're not going to round it. We want to preserve that decimal. We'll type number, okay? But in this case, because what happens is this whole thing needs to be wrapped in parentheses so that all of this code, so first thing it does is it multiplies, and it's good to understand when JavaScript does calculation, and this is kind of leading into some of the content we're going to have this week, is that when you're doing gallons times price, right, or when you're doing this type of calculation, it's going to first, this is not a parentheses in the sense that the order of operations, but first it'll take the times, and then it'll call toFixed on that, and then the whole result of that will actually get passed to the number. Now let's just look at MDN number, and it's not number attribute actually, okay. So this actually value represents, so it takes whatever that value is, and you can call number on it, and it's a capital N for number, okay? So now this is actually going to end up leading to some conversation about syntax and when we're calling some of these, and this is actually what we call a constructor. Which is good. This is good to introduce now. This is not calling a method. This is actually calling a constructor that is part of what we call OOP. which is object-oriented programming. We're going to learn more about that soon. So that's what that number is doing. Okay, so let's let this run through. Right, and we'll come in here and enter. Let's see, because I think I had one more I needed to do. Let's do two. Let's do. Right, and again, I'm making up numbers here. Okay. Actually, let's just let this run. Good. Okay. So I think that's good. This looks good right here. I think the last thing is where I kind of jumped off before, which was looking at the average. Okay. All right. So we're, in this case, we're doing, again, the round. So we can implement that same thing here where we call number, right? Or number, constructor, number. And then we're going to call a to fixed, 2 decimal places. We're going to wrap the whole thing, okay, so that it passes that to the constructor. And that's a very common way to understand that. So we'll do the same thing here. We type number. We'll go ahead and put that extra one in there because we know we're going to need it, right? And then dot to fixed 2, and then add that extra parentheses. Okay, so now let's see. By the way, it's time. I think what we'll do at this time is actually also fix this average where it's showing up, because it only shows up. Oh, let's do some decimals so we don't make sure. And we've already got some in there, so the average should calculate that just fine. Okay, good, good. And we're fixing them at 2, all of them, which is awesome. So that's a really good way. Remember, right? So I kind of waved my hand. I should have fixed this earlier. I didn't. So we covered a couple of really important things on this fix. We covered the idea of the inputs and how we can create steps, which, by the way, right, steps are these. Because we did any step, it allowed you to go anywhere. You can limit those as well. Then we started looking at the way we were handling the inputs by, instead of parse int, we did a parse float, because by doing parse int, we were getting an integer, which made us lose the decimals. I then jumped over and started looking at the average, and I stopped myself because I realized where we also needed to fix this was in the track MPG and cost. And this is where we introduced the idea of the constructor number by doing calculations, then calling to fixed, which, by the way, let me just show you. Like if I said const 10 for, actually, let's do this. Let's call num equal 10.3, right? And then we were to call const des num, would it be equal to number dot to fixed, and then we gave it 2 even though we don't need them. Okay, des num, right, is a string. I know that's kind of at the bottom of my screen there, but that's a string. And here's why it's just good to store things in where they are intended to be used. Now, JavaScript will, by its nature, do what we call coercion. And coercion is where it will say, like, if I said result equal to, let's say, 5 times des num. What's your guess? What's your result going to be, right? Okay. It actually does the multiplication, because what it's actually doing is coercing, because of the multiply, right? But I believe if we did this, result 2 equal to 5 plus s num, okay, and we did result 2, here's what it does. When it sees the plus, it thinks concatenate. And this is one of those things about JavaScript that drives people crazy sometimes. But coercion, I got it right that time, is what happens when JavaScript evaluates an expression and result, and in order to get the result, it looks at the operators being used in the data types. And in this case, because the data type was a string, right, des num, where I called the to fixed on it, it said, oh, you know what? On this, I'm just going to take the 510 and I'm going to actually just push them together. Okay. All right. Actually, it takes 5. And yeah, that's what it's doing. It's concatenating them. Okay, I hope this helps. Commit your code. If you already had this code, you can just put something in your README about I didn't have to fix it, or if there's any comments that you have about this fix that I've done, any feedback is always welcome, right? So you'll end up having first your fix the IO, whether you did it or whether you just thought about how to do it. And in this case, we have fixed code. If you had already done it, leave me a comment about in the README file about my approach, where you think I should have changed it. And by the way, the other thing I've been doing a lot more, to my surprise, is asking ChatGPT things, and I definitely recommend doing that. I'm trying to think of how I will teach this course next semester in the fall, using it more and more. So feedback about that would be great as well. All right, let's move on.